So I'm gonna do some announcements and then
I talked to you guys and stuff, I know. Yeah, gotta take care of the preliminary stuff.
hopefully the owl is gonna behave. Thanks. Okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Scadden. I'm the Director of Science here at the Marine Resources Council. Just a few housekeeping updates before we get started. We have a lot going on at MRC in the month of August, and as usual, we could use your help as volunteers. So starting tomorrow, the August 5th, we have the Lagoon Explorers Mangrove Edition. This is for children. And so if you have a school-age child that you would like to enroll in that, please see our website. That is happening tomorrow. This Friday is the first Friday Litter Sweep, and so that is our monthly event around property to clean up litter. August 14th, we have the Mangrove Workshop here in this nursery, the Palm Bay Workshop, that goes from 9 to 11 a.m. Please register online so that we know you're coming. And then on August 15th, Brooke is going to be doing a Lagoon House guided tour around the property. If you ever wondered what it's about, what the history is, Brooke will tell you. And then on August 17th and 18th, Jessica and I will be down in Jupiter Island at the invasive property to plant a bunch of native plants to replace the invasive plants we removed this year. And it's about 500 plants, so please give Jessica and I a hand, please. And then on Friday, August 21st, we are having a Meet the Staff happy hour and pint night at the local. So we'll be there to hang out and meet people. If you haven't met Laura, our executive director, or me, or Jessica, or any of us, that's the time to do that. And then finally, our Sebastian Mangrove Workshop has been moved a week back this month. So usually it's the third Saturday of the month. This month it is the fourth Saturday of the month, so that is August 29th at our Sebastian property. Again, please register online for that so we know that you're coming. All right, some housekeeping. For my in-person folks here, please silence your cell phones. I've got note cards somewhere that I will pass out. So if you have questions for our speaker, please write those down and we'll come around and collect them just so that we can repeat those questions for the people on Zoom so that they can hear it. And then if you're on Zoom, you'll notice our chat is disabled. This is a webinar, so if you have any questions for our speaker, please put them in that Q&A section and I will read them out at the end of his presentation so he can answer those for you. All right, so today's speaker is Nicholas Curto. He is a marine biologist and conservationist who was born and raised in Florida and is from his hometown of Stuart. He got his undergraduate degree from USF in environmental science and a master's degree from Unity College in marine science. He worked for several years at the Loggerhead Marine Life Center, doing everything from nesting surveys to releases before coming to Florida Oceanographic Society, where he is today. He currently manages the nursery at Florida Oceanographic Society, overseeing the growth of multiple seagrass species, mangrove species, and runs the oyster monitoring program. So with that, let's welcome Nick to give us his presentation. And I will present that for those on Zoom.
Good afternoon, everyone. That was a wonderful introduction by Mara. And so today I'm just going to dive right into it. My presentation is about Florida Oceanographic seagrass nurseries, their importance and role in networking and collaboration.
Nick, I'm going to take it down for just a second so I can put it on here.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No, that's my fault.
As you could tell, I'm really excited.
Okay, perfect. Yes. It's doing that instead of weird. Technical difficulties, folks. Hold on just a second. Yes. Okay.
Good.
Does your clicker work? Nope. But I have clicked on it. There you go.
So I'm relying on you. Okay.
No, it will now work, but I had to click on it first.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Sorry, folks. Technical difficulties. So as I was saying, I'm going to talk about the Florida Oceanographic seagrass nursery, its importance and role in networking collaboration. And before I dive into the slides and everything, I'm going to give a brief overview about the kind of the past, the present, where the nursery is at currently, and then along with some of the work we're doing, especially our genetics work. And then at the end, kind of summarizing all that we go through. So for those who are not familiar, seagrasses are a foundation species of plants that actually grow under the water completely. So unlike mangroves and some other species, which are kind of in that tidal zone, these guys are always in the water. They're never exposed. They are important because they form habitat for other species, especially those in their juvenile life stages. Like a lot of the game fish that a lot of fishermen rely upon start their early life stages in this habitat. They're also a primary food source for all the wonderful charismatic megafauna that everyone loves and holds dear, like our sea turtles and our manatees. And then not only do they provide food and habitat, they also influence the chemistry of the environment in the form of oxygenating the water and changing the sediment composition. So seagrasses are just like all the other terrestrial plants that you see around you. They actually photosynthesize, so they're producing oxygen. And you can actually see that a lot of the time in the form of little bubbles that will actually come off the blades of seagrass. So, sorry about that, folks. So there are several different species of seagrass that occur in the IRL and throughout other parts of Florida. The three that we mainly highlight in our nursery at FOS are Serigodium filiforme, which is manatee grass, Calendula wrighti, which is shoal grass, and Velasquia testonium, which is turtle grass. So the main thing I kind of want everyone to focus upon with these images is how they look so drastically different from one another in a physiological sense. Like for example, the turtle grass tends to have those thicker, broader leaves, while the shoal grass tends to have more wispy, kind of like blade-like appearance. So each of the species kind of has different physiological differences to distinguish them. So seagrasses are really important plants. However, they have to deal with a lot from us. So especially in the form of anthropogenic influences. And a perfect example, like you can see in the image there, where all this grass has died off, is in the form of freshwater discharges, algae blooms, and poor water quality. And the next slide, I love this next slide coming up because it's going to really highlight it and hit it home. So seagrasses from Lake O or in the Lake O area actually get hit really hard whenever there's freshwater discharges. So what that means is large amounts of fresh water, millions of gallons of it, are entering the system in a very short amount of time. Especially this is the case where Stewart is, where we have the C-44 canal, where a lot of that fresh water from Lake Okeechobee enters the system. So this is 2016. You can see kind of all the dark patches that are highlighted with this circle here. So that's all seagrass. And this is actually just a little south of where Florida Oceanographic is located on Hutchinson Island. Fast forward to 2017, all those dark patches are basically gone. And the reason for this is during that time span, we had a major discharge event where it actually occurred for a period of a few months. And because of that, all the seagrass in that area actually died off. So not only is seagrass affected by these changes when freshwater discharges occur, salinity changes like that can also harm oysters, skanefish, and other species. So the main thing is a lot of these other species, if something starts to change in the environment, can move on. Seagrass can't. They have roots. They're established. If something changes in the water chemistry, they're either able to kind of fight it off, or if it continues to get worse to the point where they're not able to survive, they will die off. So the role of nurseries. So the role of nurseries is to establish stable stock of various seagrass species for research and restoration purposes. Florida Oceanographic is not the only seagrass nursery. There are other nurseries spread throughout the state, and we all kind of like work with one another and try and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So for those who have not been to Florida Oceanographic, please come. It's a wonderful facility. I know for some folks, it's probably a decent drive. I mean, it was an hour and a half drive for me to get here today. So it's worth it though. And this main space that I'm highlighting right now is kind of like our cream of the crop. Like this is like the highlight space. So it's called the Gamefish Lagoon. It is a 750,000 gallon aquarium. It looks like a small pond, but it is actually an aquarium. This is where all of our different species that we have, everything from our nurse sharks to our kingfish to our sea turtles and stingrays, they all live in this space. And this space actually gets fed by fresh water, or excuse me, not fresh water, salt water from the Atlantic Ocean. So there's actually a channel or a pipeline that runs directly across under A1A and actually feeds us fresh salt water from the ocean constantly. So the reason why I'm highlighting this space is for all of our seagrass spaces that we're going to talk about today, it is actually feeding them as well. So the first seagrass space we're going to talk about is our seagrass meadow. So you can see it's kind of this space off to the left-hand side of our Kingfish Lagoon. So all the water from the Kingfish Lagoon circulates in a counterclockwise motion and eventually makes its way into our meadow space. So all the dark patches that you were seeing, like in the previous images that you see in this one, that's actually all seagrass. So that space is actually utilized for not only our conservation, like when we do outplanting, but we also use it as a research space as well. So think of it as kind of like a mini replicant of the IRL. That's how we best describe it to everybody. The other space we're going to talk about today is our front of house space. So that's the space highlighted in the kind of reddish orange circle. So that is 34 tanks that are constantly flowing in and out with that water from Kingfish Lagoon. So think of it as like a circulatory system where the water will actually come in, feed all the tanks, and then go right back out. The third and final space that we'll talk about closer to the end is our back of house space or experimental array space. So this is actually kind of our newest addition where we recently had a revamp, and we're going to highlight all the exciting stuff that we're possibly going to do out there. Excuse me, I'm going to take a swig. A lot of talking. So that's kind of like an overview of all the spaces. And I'm now going to go into like the past because we've had some pretty humble beginnings, I would say. So in the past, all this started with volunteers and staff literally walking the shorelines of the IRL, collecting fragments that you see like in the bottom right corner there. And what they would do is they would put them in, oops, sorry.
That was probably me.
So what they would do is they would actually put them in the buckets that you see kind of in the second image, and then they would eventually bring them back to FOS. So this happened over the course of years, like way before I was even at Florida Oceanographic. And so once they brought them back to Florida Oceanographic, that grass would actually be planted in the blue tubs that you see there, which are our tanks. And so over the course of years and years, that's where all of our stock of our seagrass came from. It's literally just viable fragments that break off from seagrass growing in the wild that we'd bring back to our nursery. So, as wonderful as that sounds, there was definitely some drawbacks to this. So one of the main things, as you can see kind of in the image on the right there, we actually used to put the grass in these plastic tubs. Why is plastic so bad? Because over the course of time, especially as it's exposed to salt water, it actually breaks and fragments into little pieces. And so we would actually be lifting up these plastic tubs and they would actually break apart in our hands. So very bad in regards to that. We also reduce the growth of the grass. We would oftentimes find with these plastic tubs, the roots of the grass would actually be trying to escape the limits of the tub. And that was just because we were limiting the growth of it. The other thing is, besides the tubs, as you can see in the image on the left there, the tanks were actually different heights in different like depths at different points in time. So they were not all uniform. So some grass in the really shallow tanks would actually get sunburnt because of how close to the surface of the water they were. So going now to the present, like I was highlighting before, this is still the front of house space that I was talking about before. So there's a total of 34 tanks, and they're actually all the same length, width, and height now. That was one of the main things we wanted to change going forward, is we wanted uniformity across the board. So along with that, they all have a PVC standpipe drain at one end and a seawater inflow on the other. So like I was saying with that circulatory system before where the water's going in and coming out at the same rate, that is essentially what we're having with all 34 of those tanks occurring. So for those of you who are engineering people, aquarius people, I always like to include the schematics in there because I can talk about it at length, but actually showing the image of what it looks like that I'm describing is always very helpful in my opinion. So you can see kind of the blue represented there at the very beginning. That's actually where the inflow starts. And then it flows actually underneath the arrays of tanks, comes up and then jumps right into it. And then the brown plumbing that's actually underneath the tanks, that's actually our outflow. So the two are actually kind of almost on top of one another, but to the point to where you're not able to see it if you walk by our nursery. It's actually all buried under stone. So the tanks in the front of house are divided into two groups. The first group is our grow out tanks. So these tanks, we wanted to kind of have, like I said, uniform across the board. So sediment height, composition, and water flow is basically all the same for these, regardless of the species. It wasn't always easy trying to figure this all out. So one of the main things that we've also had a problem with, along with the lack of uniformity, is the grass would actually get burnt in the summertime, like I was saying before, due to a lack of shading. So we kind of went back to the board and we're trying to figure out what would work and what wouldn't work. And we actually came up with shading. So you can actually see those black kind of screens that stretch across all the tanks. And the idea is it actually filters out 70% of the UV radiation while still letting some penetrate into the grass. So it actually, we've seen it already. And if you guys come to our nursery, I highly recommend checking it out for yourself. Our grass is actually not getting sunburned now. Compared to previous years where there was no screens and no shade, where they would actually turn brown, and then especially with our turtle grass, it would actually turn a reddish pigment color because of how stressed it would be. This year, we're not seeing that at all. So it shows that in a year's time, by making an adjustment like this, makes all the difference in the world. So along with shading, we're also kind of running into a dilemma of the lack of movement, because most people don't realize this, but seagrass in its natural environment in the IRL, the water is always moving. Even though you don't necessarily notice it, currents are shifting, the wind picks up, the tide goes in and out. The seagrass is always being stimulated by motion. So it's just like how terrestrial plants are stimulated by the wind. Seagrass works the same way. Stimulation actually positively is correlated with growth. So to kind of figure that out, I actually came up with this design. I call it a flow bar. So basically it's like a bunch of PVC stuck together in the shape of a T, and the holes there actually let the water flow in a specific pressurized way where it moves the grass. And so that wasn't a bad idea, but we noticed that like it wasn't moving the grass enough. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board again. This time, we actually decided to put wave makers in there. I love these things. These are like fantastic. I'm biased, but these are actually variable speed wave makers. They're called octos. And the idea is you can actually change it on like the motion. Like sometimes like you could have it like really wavy, or you can have it like go in long bursts. And then you can actually have it go in a circular motion or in one direction. And the beauty of it is those little motors that you see on the right there, they actually just attach to the sides of the tanks with just magnets. So there's no need to actually like put anything additional on. You just stick the one end on the motor and then the other end of the outside of the tank. And you can move them all around your tank without having to worry about any interference whatsoever with anything else. So same tank, just with the wave makers. All that motion is them. I do not have the inflow on in this video. That is them doing their thing. And you can see the grass in that image or that video. It's much longer because it's just constantly being moved in motion, basically. So that's a lot of the abiotic factors that are at play. We have a lot of biotic factors as well, because the idea is seagrass is the species that relies on both. So along with the wave makers, we're also kind of looking into different interactions with different species. And so I wanted to highlight some of the species that we have in some of our tanks, because if you walk by, you may not necessarily notice them right off the bat. The first ones actually are fighting conchs. So we wanted to kind of see how these guys would actually affect the sediment chemistry of the tanks, because they're burrowing animals. We didn't know if they would necessarily stimulate the grass in a positive, negative, or neutral way. We found out that basically it's neutral for them because the grass didn't necessarily grow faster, but they didn't harm the grass either. The second species that you see in the middle there is peppermint shrimp. So we wanted to actually have a species that didn't necessarily do anything to the grass, but actually affected a different species that usually pops up in our tanks. For those who are not aware, there's different species that kind of just naturally occur in saltwater tanks. Some of them are bristleworms, some of them are little snails. One of the more common ones is this type of anemone called Aptasia. And so the idea is we wanted to reduce the growth of the Aptasia that was growing on top of the grass. So the peppermint shrimp are really excellent in regards to that. So anyone watching that is having trouble with Aptasia, highly recommend peppermint shrimp. They work like a charm. The third species that we wanted that we kind of had in our tanks for periods of time are pinfish. So pinfish are omnivorous fish that eat other organisms, but also eat seagrass. And so we've actually had them in our tanks for a period of time. Some of them are like almost the size of my hand, or probably longer now at this point. And they actually keep the grass in check. So think of it as positive herbivory, where the idea is something is coming along and mowing the grass, but the grass doesn't get completely consumed. And so because of that, it actually grows a little faster to try and keep pace with something that's eating it. So we've actually found that the tanks that the pinfish are in, the grass grows much longer and faster. So something to keep in mind. So now shifting gears, I'm going to focus now on a lot of the genetic work that we're doing in our tanks. So we wanted to, with all the stuff I've said already, with the fragments and everything like that, we haven't necessarily really explored the potentially high genetic diversity of the grass, because remember, for years, people were collecting it in different places. So we didn't necessarily know where it was coming from, though. To try and answer this question, especially with regards to manatee grass, we worked with a collaboration with Dr. Segura Garcia at HBOI, Harvard Branch, and Dr. McCoy. And in a project funded by both, we sampled manatee grass from several different areas. So you can see with the dots on the map of Florida here, we sampled grass from everywhere, all the way down the Keys, the upper parts of the IRL, to other nurseries as well. So yes, big scary image, I know. I love these, and I love breaking them down. So let me drink real quick. So this scary thing is a dendrogram. And the idea of the dendrogram is it groups individuals collected from different populations. So all the different colors and shapes and everything that you see going on in this crazy image are all from different populations. So the horizontal lines that you see kind of going all over the place there indicate the distance between connected groups. So I kind of want to highlight that. So think of it like all these are different groups. And so I wanted to also highlight the fact that the groups in the bigger circle here are much closely related to the groups than the groups in this circle here. So the vertical lines that you see going across indicate similarity. So for example, the ones in the highlighted bar there are more similar than the ones way over there. So we could tell where these plants were from and how closely related they are. So that's hopefully an easy way to explain what we're looking at here. So yes, big scary key now. So I wanted to specifically highlight, though, from all different locations, our nursery and then Harbor Branch's nursery, because they also have a seagrass nursery as well. So the Harbor Branch nursery is highlighted by the blue circles or blue dots that you see with the black arrow. So they're kind of in their own little corner of the dendrogram. Meanwhile, with us, represented by the black triangle, you can see that our seagrass pops up in several different places. So for example, like you can see with the purple or the purple dot, like those ones are from Sebastian. And then the green ones, those are from like Loxahatchee. So completely different locations, right? So what does that mean, breaking all this down? So it means that FOS has genotypes from different regions of the IRL, which is really exciting because that means that the different genetic diversity that we have might be locally adapted to different stressors, like different types of or different levels of salinity or temperature ranges. So some of them might be well suited for certain areas better than others. And so how that helps us is with informed restoration. So for a long time, everyone's just been very focused on trying to put grass out there and hope for the best. That can no longer work because of the different challenges and different obstacles that each region of the IRL face. So with that, we want to hopefully either increase the diversity of restoration plots when we do restoration projects, or maintain locally adapted genotypes. So for example, grass from the Loxahatchee region might stay in the Loxahatchee region, or grass from Sebastian might stay in Sebastian. Or the idea of actually mixing them together and putting them out there in plots combined with one another might be the idea, it might be the better solution as well. We don't know yet. But the idea, now that we know that they're from different areas, we will hopefully help be able to figure that out. So breaking all that down, this sequencing of the manatee grass will allow us, like I said, to understand what genes are different between these populations. So we're not only doing genetic work with manatee grass, we're also doing it with Halogili reddi, which is shoal grass. So in addition to what I was just talking about with the manatee grass, we have sequenced the genome of Halogili reddi. So no one else has done this, and this is a very big deal. Like, we are the first to do it, and it's really exciting to actually be able to say that. So we've had the rad sequence data that compares grass to a mass mortality event back to the source of population in our nursery. So the next slide will make much more sense with that one. So what we're just looking at with the other dendrogram, think of it as the same thing, just in a kind of circular image here. So all these samples that you see all originated from our meadow space that I kind of highlighted at the very beginning of the presentation. So the green ones represent the meadow, and then the blue and the red actually represent grass that we took from the meadow and put at these two locations. So FOS location, that's actually just right off of our back part of our property where we have our dock and everything. So not very far from where it originated in the nursery. The red one, however, we actually went to private property all the way up at Fort Pierce, and we planted this grass. So the grass in Haynes and FOS were planted at the same time for this project. However, the grass in both of those projects experienced a mass mortality event to where the majority of it died off for different reasons. We went back after the mass mortality event, took samples of the remaining grass in those locations, and this is the result of that. So you can see that certain groups are not related to stuff that's in the nursery, and then other ones are much more closely related. Like you see the green next to some of the blue and the red on the upper part of the dendrogram, while the red and blues and other parts aren't related to either other ones in the meadow. So this is really interesting. So it shows the fact that not only are the manatee grass like tanks that we sampled from really genetically diverse, so is our meadow space. So this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to like stuff we're doing out in the meadow space, which is, I love it. So speaking of genetics tanks and the grass out there, we've actually started to separate these variants and these groups into their own tanks. So you can see that represented by the blue tags, because we've learned that trying to attach tags to seagrass does not work. Let's just say that was a very interesting learning curve. So instead of actually attaching it to the grass, we actually have it on the sides of the tank, so we track them. So you can see in the images on the bottom right and in the middle, those are actually two different genotypes of grass that we have separated by a barrier. And so we are actually growing this grass right now in our nursery. So we could actually use it for different experiments or stress testers, like with our temperature, our salinity, turbidity, everything like that. So to kind of summarize all of this, what has changed for us, like with everything I've talked about? So the tanks, like I was talking about, completely refurbished, which is absolutely wonderful. It was a nightmare before. All the grass that were in those plastic tubs that I also talked about before are not in plastic tubs anymore. We kind of replicated like a completely natural environment to the point to where all the sediment kind of fills each of the tanks to a certain height. And we also replaced all the sediment too. We found that a lot of the sediment that were in those tubs was kind of just not the best. Let's just say that, and really, really absolutely terrible for the overall like nutrients that grass needs to grow. We also added electricity. So with those weight makers I was talking about, we need a lot of electricity to run them. So we actually retrofitted the entire front of house space to the point to where we're able to actually run weight makers and other electrical devices out there as well. And then we've also added, like I was highlighting before, the biotic and the abiotic factors like our shading, our weight makers, and then a lot of the different species that I highlighted as well. So I wanted to include this wonderful image. So for those who do not know, seagrass actually flowers. And so one of our wonderful researchers on my team, Nathaniel Wynn, if he's watching, actually took a bunch of these photos of turtle grass flowering. So this is just one of the projects we're doing out there, is trying to see when the grass flowers, how much it flowers, and if we're able to identify male versus female flowers. So I just wanted to highlight that. That's always one of my favorite images. I love using it. So along with the renovations I just highlighted, we're hoping to double the stock of all the current species that we have, which I would say if you ever come and see our tanks, we're doing a pretty good job of. We also want to add new species as well. So I highlighted the three. There are others. And the idea is we want to create kind of like a diverse meadow. Like that's what it's supposed to be. All these different species all growing together, not just one or two. We also wish to increase the research collaboration with other nurseries in the region. So with not only with Harbor Branch, but hopefully with like the Brevard Zoo and then the Marine Discovery Center, there are other nurseries spread throughout the state that we hope to have the opportunity to work with on future projects, and then just collaborating with general knowledge where we let each other know what works and what doesn't work. And then nursery sales. So this is not yet, but we'll get to that. I jumped the gun, apologies. So with all that in mind, it's a wonder that I don't lose my sanity. So it is a lot to stay on top of. So I took an image on the right here. This is our checklist. So you can see it's kind of like color coded, and the different colors mean different things. So the red actually represents daily tasks, the green represents weekly tasks, and the blue represents monthly tasks. So I am constantly busy, but it takes a village to make this all possible in the first place. I just want to take a moment to highlight all the wonderful volunteers who actually come out here every day that I'm there to clean these tanks, to make sure the waymakers are working, to basically make sure that like I'm not getting overwhelmed, and if something's going on to let me know so I can quickly fix it. Like this would not be possible with just myself. So just I always like to highlight that because I think it's super important to let people know that it's not just one or two people behind the scenes making everything happen. It is multiple people, whether it's staff, volunteers, interns, all working together to make sure that this nursery is up to shape and actually like doing what it needs to do. So now my sales pitch. So we are an active nursery. We sell seagrass, and if you're interested or have shoreline property, please reach out to us. That's basically my sales pitch. So seriously though, if you are interested or have an idea of people who are interested, we always like to reach out, have them reach out to us so we can figure out what will work and what won't work. So contact is initially made through email, whether it's me, my staff, other staff members, or our director of research. And then once we figure out what your project is and how much grass you'll need, it's all by an in-person pickup. So the grass is placed in a secure container with salt water. I always emphasize this because I've seen people actually transport seagrass when it's not in water, and that basically decreases your chances of success. The seagrass needs to remain hydrated. If it like gets dehydrated in transport and you try to outplant it somewhere to where you're whatever project you're doing, the chances of success should decrease dramatically. So that is something I always highlight. The future. So finally getting to like the end of it. So I know you're probably thinking, he hasn't talked about this one space yet. I'm going to now. So you can see with these tubs here, we call this our backup house or our experimental array. So these are actually blocks of 4 tanks, and there's a total of 4 of them. So there's 16 of them. And how it works is, I wish I had a diagram for this. I couldn't actually find it before the presentation, but the idea is it's a circulating system like our front of house, except they're all isolated. So each of these blocks of 4 are not exchanging water with one another. They're their own things. So if someone like a visiting researcher were to want to come and actually use 2 of the blocks and another person wanted to use the other 2, they could, and they would actually not have their experiments interfere with one another in any way, shape, or form. We've never had a space like this before. So it's really exciting to actually broadcast this and let hopefully people like the Marine Resource Council or other folks who may need to do experiments and don't necessarily have the space, we have the space. So and then we actually do want to highlight the space. It kind of, I wouldn't say got christened, if you will, but it was actually utilized very recently for an experiment we were doing with sea cucumbers. So just wanted to highlight that. So, like I was saying, takes a village to get it all done. We are not the only ones in this game that are doing all this work, and we collaborate with so many different entities, whether it's other organizations, schools, just people in general. So, all these different schools that you see on there, FAU, UF, and FIT, we all work with them in different projects. Like our metaspace experiments that I was talking about before, we actually work with like people from FAU to do stuff out there. Our NOAA project, where we actually just recently put out a bunch of grass in the earlier part of this year. We were working with a project with UF, and then we're actually working with FIT and using a potential chemical biochar to actually see if that will positively affect the growth of grass. So this is just some of the stuff has already been done. Some of the stuff is stuff to look forward to. It is very exciting to see all this progress that's being made. So I kind of wanted to end with a view of our wonderful meadow, where it's just, this is one of my favorite places to go to if I just need to kind of unwind and just kind of look out and like take a deep breath. It is absolutely beautiful. There's a variety of different animals that live in this space, and you never know what you're going to see out there. So that's kind of the end of my presentation, and I'm now open to questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. I'm going to close for Q&A. If you have questions in the audience here, please raise your hand and we'll collect your cards. But I'm going to start with my question because I can.
Love it.
So if you have homeowners that want to plant seagrass on their docks, but don't know how to plant seagrass, how would you go about? Do you have a way to teach them how to do it, or do you have somebody who could plant for you? What kind of stuff is that?
So it depends on the sort of project we're doing. So we've had different like entities like private businesses come and they'll usually take it and do it themselves. Or if it's a private homeowner, like it depends on if they're in an HOA or not. So we've actually given like grass to other folks who sometimes do the work for us. But I would say if we're doing it, I like to personally go out there and just make sure everything's all hunky-dory, like whether we're using burlap mats to put the grass in there or plugs, and there's a whole variety of different methods depending on your location and what would work best.
Perfect, thank you. Does seagrass need high salinity to grow most efficiently? Do you ever dilute the salt water from the Atlantic for your nursery?
Great question. No, we do not dilute it. So it is just pure salt water constantly coming in. And that's what the grass is used to. So it actually, we call it a brackish species because it grows in brackish environments, but they have a pretty high salinity tolerance to the point to where they can handle 34 ppt or parts per thousand. So that's the beauty of the grass is we do not dilute it and it is perfectly okay.
How do seagrasses reproduce compared to terrestrial grass? Like, is there pollen? Do they need pollinators? What kind of stuff?
That is an excellent question that a lot of people in the seagrass world are actually trying to figure out, right? As of this moment. So seagrass is very unique. It actually reproduces in two different ways. So sexually and asexually. The asexual method is kind of like the more well understood part of it. So it actually does this process called fragmentation, where a part of the grass sometimes will actually uproot itself and detach itself and float in the water column for a period of time. So kind of like a mangrove propagule, for those who are familiar with that, where it will actually be carried by currents and may potentially land somewhere where it actually is able to establish a new meadow, which is really wild. The sexual part of it is very neat because as I highlighted with one of our images, it does flowers and there are male and female flowers. So we don't necessarily understand the process of what triggers flowering, why it occurs when it occurs, and we don't always actually see it in every single species. The turtle grass flowers are some of the larger flowers that we've seen with compared to the other two, where they're really minute. So you have to kind of like really look for the flowers in like manatee and shoal grass. So we're still figuring out a lot of like the sexual side of the reproduction, but hopefully going forward, we're able to figure out, like, for example, if there are pollinating species, like certain fish species that may come to the grass when it starts to flower, then like it actually helps with the flowering process. We don't know.
We think there are polychaete worms that are pollinators of seagrass.
Potentially,
Yeah.
there are worms that actually live entirely in the meadow spaces of grass. I mean, unfortunately, one of the more common ones we have are bristleworms, but there are other types of marine worms that also rely on seagrass.
Kind of related. Does seagrass have roots or do they have holdfasts like kelp?
Roots, so they are like a traditional plant. So that's always the main difference that we always try to distinguish between seagrass and seaweeds is seagrass is like a traditional plant because it's got roots, it photosynthesizes, and it flowers. Kelp doesn't do all that.
Have you all already attempted to outplant the different seagrass with different genetics, or is that upcoming?
That is upcoming because it takes a while for all those wonderful variants that you saw to grow. So some of them have actually filled up their entire halves of the tank, and some of them are just these little plugs still. So hopefully going into 2027, we are going to be able to not only do the experiments with them, but hopefully start to outplant them as well.
Perfect. This is kind of a big question.
Ooh.
What do you think are the concerns regarding seagrass with our super El Nino this year, coming into late fall and winter?
Great question. I don't know what's on the horizon. I will say in our part of the IRL where I'm from in Stewart, we have seen an amazing recovery of grass this summer. Like grass has popped up in areas that we have not seen in years. And I think it's just because we've had a really dry, wet season. Going forward, I don't know how that's going to change or necessarily be affected, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed in regards to we're going to continue to see this trend because as the days get shorter and we do enter winter, the grass will naturally do this process called senesce, where it will shed a bunch of leaves and actually start to look like it dies off, but it doesn't die off completely. And that's just because there's not as much energy in the system, so the days are not as energy filled with the sun, and then the temperatures are not as high. So to answer that big question, I hope the trend that we're seeing in summer continues. Who knows?
Yeah.
Our water quality is very much dependent on the actions of certain entities. And if trends continue to where we don't really have a lot of water entering the system in the form of fresh water, things should hopefully be okay.
Yeah. So kind of back to your salinity question earlier, are you experimenting with the environment of the Banana River, which tends to have lower salinity than open ocean? Or is it okay to just outplant those species that are used to open ocean salinities there?
With specifically regards to the Banana River region, I don't know. We don't necessarily do a lot of like planting in that region, unfortunately. We kind of focus more on the southern part of the IRL, like kind of like Fort Pierce, Jensen Beach, like kind of like I would say St. Lucie and Martin counties. We don't necessarily get up that high, so I can't necessarily answer
That's okay.
with regards to that region.
Yeah, I think Restore Our Shores does a lot of work in the Banana River, so they would be a good resource if you wanted to reach out to them.
Definitely, because like I was saying before, there are the nurseries that focus in other parts of the IRL, like especially in like Brevard County. I would say like the Brevard Zoo is definitely like the main entity when it comes to like seagrass outplantings and everything. So.
Yeah. Carbon sequestration question.
Ooh.
Do you think nursery grown seagrass that is outplanted will be more successful in terms of carbon sequestration than naturally grown seagrass? And for those of you who don't know what carbon sequestration is, it's the absorption of carbon, usually carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Good question. I don't know if it's necessarily more efficient than the wild variants that we compared to our nursery variants. I like to think they're both efficient in regards to the sequestration of carbon. So the more grass that's out there, the more carbon that's sequestered overall. So the idea is not only do we want the wild grass to continue to grow, we also want to make sure it fills back in as well. So we're just kind of helping it along by having the role of our nursery kind of fill in those gaps and blanks where it used to be.
Yeah, the more plants, the better the carbon sequestration.
Bingo. There you
go. When you talk about increasing the genetic diversity of your seagrass, how far away do you plan on collecting the shoots from? Specifically, are you limiting the geographic range to just the lagoon, or are you going to other coasts to get shoots or other places?
I would say based on the dendrogram that you guys saw, like with our fragment collection, like we're not necessarily limited by system. So for example, some of those like from Loxahatchee are like from the Lake Worth Lagoon system. So that's not necessarily the IRL. So we're not necessarily limited by system, but we are a small nonprofit and we don't necessarily have volunteers everywhere that are able to do this. So it's just wherever the volunteers are and just happen to be walking around.
Yeah, so if you happen to live on the other side of the state and want to drive over to Nick with seagrass shoots, go for it.
I don't know if they'll survive, but good
You
luck.
can try. Last question for you. Can you please share some more about your sea cucumber experiment?
Okay, so the idea behind I had a feeling I was going to get a question about this. This was actually not my experiment. It was actually run by an intern this past summer. But the idea behind it was just like with the other species to see if it would actually positively, negatively, or neutrally affect the growth of grass. And so the idea was we actually put them in our front of house tanks. Long story short, that did not work because they got predated upon by a certain marine worm, the bristle worm, which we did not know about. We thought they were just detritivores, and we learned the hard way that they were actually carnivores when it comes to that specific species of sea cucumber.
Sure.
That was one of those examples of a fun learning curve. So we moved them to our back of house array shortly after that, and we actually found that they did positively affect the growth of the grass because they kind of, if you ever seen a sea cucumber, they kind of mosey around the entire tank. They don't just stay in one place. So
excellent.
Yes, they did actually help with regards to seagrass growth. So more experiments are needed to be done with them in a more controlled environment.
Yes, definitely. And there is research happening on sea cucumbers and seagrass all over the place, which is really cool.
We are not the only ones.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Nick. Unless there's any other questions in house.
I have one more question. Talking about the at Meadow, the using the salt water from the ocean. Okay, and of course, if they here in the river, I mean, the Turkey Creek, when with all the development of out in Palm Bay, with a flash flood, the creek just flows directly into the I don't know what.
Into the lagoon.
Yeah. I don't know, so is any big change in the salinity will knock them right out if you know, if it like goes to 10 parts per 1,000?
I'm gonna repeat that for people on Zoom. So for those on Zoom, the question was about freshwater influx into the lagoon. For example, when Turkey Creek has a lot of freshwater input and tends to flood the surrounding lagoon areas.
So to answer that question, yes, it can have a major effect. Like we've been very fortunate so far, but that doesn't mean that will stay fortunate. Like especially in our part, like with the St. Lucie locks or the C44 canal, if that opens and all those millions of gallons of fresh water enter our system, all that seagrass that like I was talking about that grows on the back part of our property will die off because turbidity basically tanks, it's not able to photosynthesize, and then the salinity, the balance gets upset because you will go from 34 ppt to 21 or sometimes even below that. Like it can dramatically drop in a very short amount of time. So with regards to this region, it probably works very similar where if you have freshwater sources that are just being suddenly flowed with all this water entering the system, it can have a very dramatic negative effect.
Yeah, so here in the central IRL, because we don't have inlets as many as the south and the northern IRL, we see salinity flux a lot. And so that I'm not a seagrass expert, I'll start with that, but that has been linked to why the central IRL has not seen as much seagrass recovery as the south and the northern IRL.
Yes.
Well, I live just in from the inlet, Sebastian, and I have on the water I live, I have a dock. I want to put the living dock oysters on my dock, so will that also help?
Yes.
Seagrass? Because I'm seeing a lot of seagrass now.
Yeah, so the question is about the relationship between oysters and seagrass.
So fun thing about me, so we didn't necessarily highlight too much. I'm also the oyster man as well.
Big bro.
Yes, I dabble. So no, I wasn't expecting to get an oyster question today. This is fun. So yes, I 100% say yes, fully encourage it because oysters are just as important as seagrass. So the main ones that we always highlight, especially the Marine Resource Council too, are seagrass, oysters, and mangroves. So these three habitats are not like separate from one another. They are oftentimes growing on top of one another. A perfect example of that is with red mangroves especially. You'll oftentimes see a bunch of red mangroves literally draping over the water, and then their prop roots are sticking in the water. And then once they get exposed to low tide, you'll actually see oysters growing on the prop roots. And so that actually is one of the inspirations for, if you've ever seen vertical oyster gardens or bogs, that's where that idea comes from. It's from nature. And then literally right under the bog, you'll sometimes actually see shoal grass growing right there. Like it is, though all three of those habitats, I always encourage, like, they need to be there. Like, I know a lot of people don't necessarily, Mark is probably gonna get upset, don't always love mangroves.
Oh, no, I'm upset.
And they always tend to lean more towards the seagrass and the oysters, but I always encourage all three. So if you're doing like something living docks related, I always am gung ho, and yes, I always say full support, go for it.
Do you guys have a living docs program?
We used to.
Okay, so Florida Tech has one, and I can get you the contact information if you'd like to do that. But yeah, oysters, mangroves, and seagrasses do coexist. We love them, and mangroves are manageable, even though there is a large misconception that you can't do anything with them. That is not true.
100% agree.
Ask me more questions if you have them.
To 5 feet above.
So if they're
the water.
between 6 and 10 feet, you are allowed to trim them within reason. You can't defoliate them, but you are allowed to trim them. Above 10 feet and above 20 feet, you need a permit and a mangrove trimmer, somebody who is trained in that. And if they're below 6 feet, hands off, can't touch. Because they are critical to our habitat here in Florida.
That's measured from the water line.
It's measured from the root base.
Root
I have
base.
a diagram if you need to see it. Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Let's give him a round of applause. And this will be uploaded to YouTube in the next couple days. So if you want to rewatch it, you want to give Nick props, go for it. Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to sign off online.